Is that chair taken?
Yes.
But that one back there. Well, I think we will begin because we've come a little bit late. That's fine. Firstly, my name's Helen Haste. I'm co-convener with Mira Levinson of the CMEI. Hello, come in. CMEI Chairs Through Here. Across there. Initiative, which is basically a seminar series where we have provocative and interesting talks on civic and moral education. Today, the format we're using is not a talk, it's a dialogue, where we hope to have provocative and lively discussion amongst our panelists, and then, of course, involve all of you in Q&A afterwards. I'll shortly introduce the four panelists. I have a more extended bio for them than you have received on the original email announcement. So, as it's such interesting bios, I put a little space. Can I please remind you that we do have a sign-up sheet which we pass around. Please can you just sign your name and your email address clearly, and also, if you like, add your institution. Then we can add you to our CMEI mailing list. Although this is either the last or possibly the second last event this year, we will be having events next year as well. So if you're on the list, you'll be notified next year of events that are taking place. And we have a very large email list now. Over 1,700 people are on our mailing list. Fortunately, they don't all come every time. It's complicated, but a very lively group, a very different group come regularly for the event, so we have a diversity of experience. Today we're talking about bridging divides, the promises and invitations of cross-cultural digital exchange programs. And when Liz and I were talking about it, it's an opportunity to raise some provocative questions, interesting questions, about an area which I think we all agree needs some scrutiny, to know what we actually mean by it and what we don't mean by it. And that is global citizenship, global citizenship education. What global citizenship means, what we'd like it to mean, what it unfortunately doesn't mean, what it's sometimes interpreted to mean, perhaps unfortunately, and generally how we should be addressing this question. And of course, at the moment, it's one of those areas that's become somewhat under scrutiny as a consequence of the events following November, because the way we think about things now is a little different from what we did perhaps before November the 9th last year. And not just here, but of course worldwide. So it'll be an interesting afternoon. And so I will now, with great pleasure, introduce the panel, starting as the way they're sitting. Liz Jura Singh, I'm just going to read this, forgive me, but it's easier to read it than try to remember it. She is Principal Investigator at Project Zero, which is, of course, as you know, a research centre based here at HGSE. She directs the Out of Eden Learn, which is an online learning community and a research project that provokes thoughtful cross-cultural inquiry and exchange amongst young people. It now has over 1,000, I think, is it 1,000 centres, is that right?
Well, we've had over 20,000 students, I can't remember.
Yes.
440. Yeah.
I have to think of
57 countries.
57 countries, yes. And this is done in collaboration with the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Paul Salopek. In addition, Liz co-directs Creating Communities of Innovation, which is an innovation that fosters inquiry-driven teacher professional development and innovation both within and across the culturally and economically diverse network of schools in the Middle East. Liz serves as lecturer of education in HGSE. She teaches a foundational course in qualitative methods, and she was formerly a high school history teacher, both in England and Australia. So Liz is very international. Qualified to talk about global issues. Shari Tishman, right, is lecturer in the School of Education, and she's a senior research associate at Harvard Project Zero, where until recently she was serving as director. Her research focuses on the development of thinking and understanding, the role of close observation in learning, and learning to and through the arts. At Project Zero, she currently co-directs Out of Eden Learn, and also Agency by Design, which is a project that investigates the promises, practices, and pedagogies of maker-centered learning. She's the author of numerous books and articles, and her current publications focus on the theme of slow looking. I meant to ask her what slow looking meant, but that she was explained today. It's an interesting concept. Then we have Alia El-Amin. Alia is a lecturer in the Harvard School of Graduate School of Education. She teaches courses on critical pedagogy and emancipatory teaching. Her research interests focus on how schools can work towards social and racial justice by positioning youth of colour to deconstruct inequality and act as agents of change. She's a former elementary school teacher, and she also has worked as an instructional dean and non-profit executive director. She received a doctorate from HGSE, when was it, about 2 years ago? 2015. She also has a BA in sociology from Davidson College and an MA in elementary education from HGSE. And we have Paul Michailidis. Thank you, I better ask him before I pronounce it. That's right. Paul is not from HGSE, which is nice. He's associate professor in the Department of Marketing Communications at Emerson College, where he's faculty director of the Engagement Lab and the founding graduate program director for the Masters of Arts degree in civic media, art and practice. His research explores the nexus of media literacy, young people and engagement in civic life. He's the director of the Salzburg Academy on Media and Global Change, a program that annually gathers scholars and students from around the world to investigate media and global citizenship. I believe you have to mention that in your talk as well. He's widely published, with his most recent book being Civic Media, Technology Design, Practice, and Media Literacy and the Emerging Citizen, Youth Value, Youth Education and Participation in Digital Culture, which explores the ways in which citizens use media to meaningfully participate in civic life in the digital age. And he was featured in last week's New York Times education lecture. Nice. I noticed because it's the same photograph as you were using over here. So where you were making extremely intelligent and sensible comments about digital learning.
I only had to pay a couple of $1,000.
Congratulations. It's good to see you there. It's good to see the topic we raised as well in the New York Times. So welcome to our wonderful team. I've left them to decide how they're going to organise it, and so actually I'll tell you what's going to happen. Welcome.
Right. Right. So we're going to have a slightly dynamic format here. I'm going to kick things off by talking a little bit about the project that Shari and I and our fellow PI, Carrie James, and other team members are sitting here, and even teachers who participate in How to Lead and Learn. And then we will hear from Paul and Alia. But we did get together, well, virtually, this is all about digital exchange, and come up with 2 framing questions that the 4 of us are going to speak to during this session. So the first question, because this is a very big topic, what do meaningful cross-cultural engagement and understanding look like, and how would we know if such experiences have a long-term impact on young people? So some of what we'd like to raise today is, what does it even look like for there to be something meaningful and worthwhile going on? And then the other piece, which speaks to the issues that Helen raised there, what are some of the promises, challenges, and potential dangers regarding the concept of global citizenship? Which I might say in parentheses is not necessarily a banner that we fly our programme under, but which I think falls in the ballpark. What can get lost or overlooked with programmes that fall under this banner, and what might be some unintended consequences? And I'll also say that for us on How to Lead and Learn in particular, this is a really great opportunity for us to hear some probing questions, critical feedback, because we're so immersed in what we do, and we do generally get very positive feedback from participating students and teachers. We're looking here to push our thinking, so we are not going to be offended if people want to push back or question what we do. So in a nutshell, How to Lead and Learn, it's been running since 2013. It began as an experimental collaboration with Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Paul Salopek. Some of you may have heard him speaking. He's currently doing a multi-year journey on foot around the world, embarking on slow journalism, as he calls it. And The name of our project, Out of Eden Learn, comes from the fact that his project is called the Out of Eden Walk. And it broadly follows the migratory pathways of the ancient human ancestors from Ethiopia and beyond. So that's how we got our name and story. And we're still affiliated with Paul, we use his materials. But by this stage, we've built really an independent online learning community that's kind of standalone and which has become, we think, quite a robust model for cross-cultural inquiry and exchange amongst young people from different geographic locations, but also different walks of life, because we deliberately try and diversify groups socioeconomically. We have students participating. In fact, I think our youngest members are with Deb. So I think your youngest students are three? Three. Up to 18, 19. Initially, it was designed for middle and high school, but right from the beginning, when we first spoke about it, early childhood educators convinced us and have proven that there was room for a program like this amongst very young students. In this case, the teachers play a pivotal role. It's really mediating teacher to teacher and bringing the students along. From ages 10 and upwards, young people create their own accounts on our platform and they post for themselves under pseudonym, so it is anonymous and they don't share pictures a la Facebook or Snapchat. So the learning goals that have animated our curriculum and really what we do from the start are the following. And these riff a bit off Paul's journalism project, but are ones that Project Zero have been deeply interested for a long time. So the first pillar, if you like, of our work is getting young people to slow down, to observe the world carefully and in new ways, we hope, and also to listen very closely and attentively to other people. This is not unconnected from Shari's interest in slow looking in the book she's currently writing. The second pillar that's woven throughout our curriculum is this idea of inviting young people to exchange stories and perspectives with one another. And crucially on the platform, we're creating a space where young people can share stories both with other kids in their classroom or after-school program, but also students who they're not otherwise going to meet if this hadn't been curated in the way it is. And finally, we invite them through our activities to really reflect through the experience they're having on our platform, but also through some activities we've created, to think how their individual lives might be part of a much bigger picture, both in terms of what's unfolding currently on a global level throughout the world, but also historically. And also that taps into my interest as a former history teacher and doctoral work that I did here, partly under the supervision of Mira and Helen, I might add. We put together a series of learning groups. We call them walking parties because we have a walking theme. But this is just to give you an idea. Around the world, this is a bit of an old slide, but around the world we've had students participate at this point from 57 different countries. We've recently had a bit of a surge of enrollment, so I think if you added them, we're well over 20,000 students have participated. But in any one learning group, there will only be approximately 120 students. And so we'll deliberately pair classrooms, usually 5 or 6. We experiment with number, and it sometimes looks different with the younger students. And they follow a curriculum that we roll out. They post their work and then comment on one another's thoughts and reflections. So far, we've experimented with a few others, but so far we offer 3 principal learning journeys. These are curriculum that typically last 12 to 16 weeks at a time, and many times classes will progress through different learning journeys. The first one is about the present and the local, and it's really inviting students to slow down. They take slow walks in their neighbourhood, they document the everyday, really getting them to try and notice the culture in which they live, and at the same time to be exploring, being exposed to other people's cultures. The second learning journey, we really dive a bit deeper into historical and global connections that they might see, but still sustaining this idea of slow looking and careful listening. And then our most recent learning journey, on which we're going to draw from momentarily, It's targeting teenage students because the content matter is a bit heavy. Actually, the resources we've woven into that. And this is our foray into more, shall I say, contentious or sensitive topics. We really feel that we've built a robust model where we're seeing thoughtful exchange happening. And so we're increasingly interested in convening young people around topics of our time, really. And so the stories of human migration, which we're just going to share a sample of student work from, at the moment it's just 4 footsteps. We are thinking of expanding that. It begins by young people listening to a family member or a close friend and listening to a story of migration, be that small, so it can. We're trying to not really make too big a distinction between what we might call micro-migrations and very big transnational ones. The idea being that even every young person should be able to know somebody who has experienced movement in their life. We then ask them to take slow walks in their neighbourhoods and to see borders and boundaries in the everyday. Again, on the premise that to enter into this topic we need to feel some kind of personal connection or awareness of it. We then move into a bit more, trying to furnish them with some critical tools for looking at how migration stories are portrayed in the media. And the final piece is a bit more of a step towards a civic action by asking them to help somebody who might be entering their community to navigate their culture. And so it's not really an activist kind of a stance, but it's nevertheless something concrete to try and produce products that could be out there in the community, and some of them do post them online. All right, Shari, are we on for our dialogue? So yes. To get you into the spirit of it, a little acting is about to happen. And we're going to jump into footstep 2, which is where young people have taken walks in their neighbourhood. And we've chosen one post by a student called Bump Sheep, who is at a girls' school in Singapore. So in this case, we know it's a girl, but actually we don't always know the gender of students. And this is the picture that she posted. Shari.
Okay.
Bump Sheep. This is Bump Sheep.
Speaking of Bump Sheep, I took a walk in my neighborhood today and noticed some interesting boundaries. It was really interesting to look and observe the things around me, and it was really quite thought-provoking. To start off, I took a picture of a stop sign outside my house, because it stops vehicles from moving forward and it allows pedestrians to walk. This boundary is in the form of a sign, and it serves to ensure the safety of the residents and other drivers. As you can see, there's a school in the background, and it's also to prevent students from getting injured. This shows how boundaries are meant to protect people and give people a sense of security. As I was coming home, I noticed an invisible boundary between myself and strangers. As I got onto the bus, I sat in the back row, and the next person who sat down in the back row sat in the furthest possible seat from me. I realized from this that between people, personal space is a kind of boundary that people who were not familiar with cannot cross. As for myself, I enjoy having personal space, and usually I'd rather wait for the next train than to squeeze into an already quite packed train. I guess this really brings up the point of how boundaries serve to make people feel comfortable.
Right. So the day after Bump Sheep posted this comment, which was pretty recently, so last month, a student from Beaverton, Oregon, who has the pseudonym Jay Dizzle, responded by asking, "How often does waiting for the next train happen to you?" Then there were a few back and forth exchanges between Bump Sheep and Jay Dizzle about train frequency in Singapore and Beaverton. And then another Beaverton student with the pseudonym Balenciaga enters the conversation. Now, her comments reflect the fact that she's likely using a feature of our program, which is called the Dialogue Toolkit, to guide her response. So just before I become Balenciaga, let me introduce you to our Dialogue Toolkit. Now, the Dialogue Toolkit, which Carrie spearheaded the development of, this sits in our comments section. And we developed this when, after the first round of How to Read and Learn, we noticed that the comments that students were leaving for one another were really a little bit thin. A little bit like what you would probably see on social media with, like it, great work. And yet when we interviewed students, they'd actually derived a huge amount of meaning, had incredibly thoughtful observations to make about one another's work. And so drawing on Project Zero work around thinking routines and some other work by a teacher, Chris Sloan, who was participating in our community, we've been playing around with developing tools that might help nudge students or give them a little bit of a start to post a thoughtful comment back. So there are a range of them, and we also link to some longer thinking routines. But 3 you might want to listen out for here. Well, first, the connect, making a connection between something in the post and your own experiences, feelings, or interest. I think the extended thing about the trains, that would be an example of that. And we often see kids resonating something in somebody's life, they can make a connection with their own, sometimes to their surprise if it's a very different geographic location. In what I just read, you might hear a hint of appreciate, which is sharing what you like or value in the post you've read, but with the key instruction to be specific. Because if you just write, hey, cool post, love it, I mean, it's not really going to spark much of a conversation. And then the snip movement is where we encourage, that's symbolised by scissors from the toolbar. There we encourage students just to take a picture or a sentence from the post and then use that as a starting point, as a comment. And this can actually be a surprisingly effective tool sometimes. So, now jumping back into Balenciaga, who writes, I really like the second last paragraph you wrote, because the comparison you made with the stop sign, the school and pedestrians stood out to me. You said, quote, this shows how boundaries are meant to protect people and give people a sense of security. This sentence made me think deeper about why borders are made, and it can help me understand better why countries have borders. Bombsheet responds.
Hi, Balenciaga. Thank you for reading my post. I also feel that borders between countries are really meant to protect its citizens. However, I think in some cases, borders are also very cruel in a way because refugees and asylum seekers are unable to get past these borders and they're forced to go back to their own countries, which are probably facing some sort of problem or crisis. Borders are good and bad at the same time, and I think it is a problem for many countries today because they're struggling to strike a balance between protecting their citizens and helping people from other countries. What do you think of this, Balenciaga? How can a country ensure both its citizens' safety while at the same time giving assistance to migrants and refugees? Cheers.
And we hope this will continue. And just before I pass to Shari, to say, we've just picked a little fragment because we just wanted to give you a flavour. But actually, I would say the sophistication of the dialogue around migration and such issues puts some of mainstream media to shame in this walking party. Yeah.
And we're eager to see where it goes, as Liz says, it's ongoing right now. So the topic, so now let's stand back a little bit. We're using Out of Eden Learn as our example of what might be called the Global Citizenship Program. As Liz mentioned, we did not develop it with that title in mind, but we've come to see some of its promises. And here's how, from our vantage point, sort of what we're thinking about as the promises. The promises are the best of this kind of program, and there are many programs like it. And the best is that students really develop skills and dispositions like respect for curiosity about the world, about other cultures, that they develop understandings about other cultures, and perhaps the Holy Grail, or the most desirable thing, is that they care about making a difference and affect change. This is some of the big ideas about promise. Another thing that we think is really promising about these kinds of programs, and it's especially exciting to us, is that they can really be exemplars of good pedagogy. The students are, much of their learning is student-directed, there's lots of curiosity being developed, students are engaging in pretty sophisticated forms of thinking in various places. So one of the things that we found is that when this program gets into a classroom, some of the tools from the program migrate to other things that the teacher is teaching. We see this in particular. So true. Sorry. But maybe it's the dialogue toolkit that teachers are using in other places, or some of the thinking routines, or some of the ideas about slow walking and exploring your own community. What we're excited about is almost sort of like a Trojan horse type deal. And also, very importantly, these kinds of programs really can give students voice. We've heard of this example, and there are many other examples as well. But there are a lot of challenges, and we're beginning to learn about those. We try to address them in our program, and I'm sure that those of you who are involved in your own programs try to address them. Right now, I'm just going to mention them in very broad stroke, and then hopefully we'll hear from our other speakers, and then we can also have a conversation about these. But these won't be unfamiliar to you. But here are some of the challenges that we see. One, obviously, is structural. For Out of Eden Learn in particular, our numbers are pretty big. We can't do a lot of high touch with educators. So it sort of goes off into the world, and educators do with it what they will. We try to provide as much guidelines as we can. We have guidebooks and so forth. But you know, one of the problems is, I shouldn't say it's a problem, one of the features is that there's, you know, low touch and wide reach. But that's a structural challenge. There's also any kind of online experience. There are safety concerns that can become a challenge, bullying online and so forth. We try to do a lot of things to mitigate that, but we can't do everything. So those are some challenges as well. Certainly not only that we face. Another kind of challenge is pedagogical challenges. As I think you can glean, it's very student-driven versus content coverage. So if we want to provide a lot of information, this is not a great vehicle to do it. Although we are inching toward more content coverage in the migration learning journey, for example, where students are actually reading reports of migration and doing some of their own research. But in general, we find, we've done a lot of surveys and interviews, and students like Out of Eden Learn a lot, and they love the fact that it's student-driven. They love going off into their own neighborhoods, exploring what they want to explore, and making their own discoveries. So it's a strength, but it's a challenge as well. And it's also a challenge in terms of more civic goals. Sometimes students are very interested in affecting change. Sometimes their goals are just to take a cool walk around the block or have a fun little dialogue about some hobby that they have with another student. So, so that's just a structural challenge or a pedagogical challenge. At the heart of all of this are some of the ethical challenges, and these are challenges that I think everybody in this room probably thinks about. What should we prioritize as educators? We have such limited time with students, whether it's in the classroom or online. What should we prioritize in these troubling times where there's so many important issues and things to think about? Is it even right to let things sort of be more loose and let students find their own topics and not give them more direction in talking about certain things? This is a tension. Another one is, and this is a really big one for us, re-privileging the privileged. It's teachers, although we think that our program is pretty easy to engage with if you're a student without a lot of teacher engagement. Of course, teachers who are good at teaching in this way, who have the time to teach in this way, who have the interest to teach in this way, are more likely to take on the program. Sometimes it's schools that are more well-resourced. We're doing things to try to address that, but it is a challenge for us. But this idea is this program only reaching the people who don't really need it. And then also, are we over-promoting a particular worldview? There's a lot of sort of critical thinking, individual voice in our program that is not a worldview that is shared by the whole world. Are we sort of pushing too much of our own ideas and assumptions out there? That's a challenge. And then lastly, there's some psychological factors that I think present some challenges. There's a natural tendency for all of us, and especially for young group people, to focus on similarities. And this has a beautiful side to it. When the students say, oh, you like that? I like that too. You're like that? I'm like that too. It's a way to make friends. But it also tends to over-focus on similarities. And we try to address this by emphasizing sort of slow looking, trying to see complexity, listen carefully to other stories. But nonetheless, this is a challenge for human nature in general. Also, there's a kind of a single narrative bias, a single story. Students come to their engagement with students in other cultures with an idea that they are like one particular story that they've heard, and then they hear another story, and sometimes they just shift to this other single story. So this is something that's just a tension. And then lastly, not at all surprisingly, there's sort of this attention is exotifying or pitying people in other cultures. And this is a worry, but it's a particular challenge when you see sort of the poignant side of it. One of the things that we see is students who have come from more privileged backgrounds being amazed that they've taken a slow walk in their neighborhood, and all of a sudden they appreciate how fortunate they are. But they're always so fortunate in comparison to others, so this is sort of distancing and othering that happens there is a challenge. So these are some of the challenges we're struggling with. I suspect they are not unfamiliar to you, and I hope we can learn from you about how to address them. The very last thing that we want to just remind you of is that as we try to think about these challenges, we're doing it with these learning goals in mind. Liz shared with you these before, but this is what we really hope to develop in our students. The capacity to slow down and listen attentively to others, to exchange stories and perspective, and to really reflect how their own individual lives connect to larger human stories. So with that overview about agreement, thank you for the patience, I believe I turn to Paul now. And you're going to tell us a little bit about where you're coming from. Do you want my computer?
I can probably just plug right in there.
There's a lot of plugs here.
I just need this one. Try it. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for having me. So I think for these next 10 minutes, what's interesting here is that I can present another approach at this concept of global citizenship and global learning that is, I think, complementary in aim and scope, but a little bit different in orientation. What I hope we can do is use these two examples, or basically descriptions of projects, to frame what Aaliyah will talk about, which is where we maybe try to locate this as pedagogy and education, thinking about some of the bigger issues behind why we do this type of program. And then hopefully the dialogue we can get a little bit more critical. So I'm going to talk today about a project that that started 10 years ago as an experiment, and now 10 years later is still an experiment that's more annoying but also more enticing than it ever has been. So this is it's a project called the Salisbury Academy on Media and Global Change. This is what a typical cohort might look like. And this project differs, and just to give you a little bit of background on how it was started and what our mission is, which has not changed too much in the last 10 or 11 years. This project started as an experiment in 2006 when we saw the emergence of these connective and social technologies, and those of us who were studying, coming from media and journalism backgrounds, interested in pedagogy, on was it possible to bring together a group of young people from around the world into one intimate, intense experience where they could connect and think about how to stage a learning experience that could help them direct their media creation, their voices, their use, their sense of agency towards solving problems, social problems. And we looked at that as the anchor, but our goal was looking at, through the process of orienting a pedagogy towards a social problem and through bringing young people from around the world together, that our pedagogy would actually look at how you can use media to support positive encounter across borders, across cultures, and across divides. So this was I think it was an idea that I like to say naive enough to say I would help with. And in that first year, we gathered about 40 young people from about 15 different countries, and they range in ages from 17 to, well, young people. One of them was in his late 40s, which is a side story. And they came together, and we looked at this phenomenon of terrorism, and I'll tell you more about the type of work we do. But now, 11 years later, this summer we'll have over 80 young people from 35 countries who will come to one location in Salzburg, Austria, from around the world and spend 1 month with us exploring the intersection of media and extremism. And so the idea behind this looks pretty much, this is kind of a cross section from the last few years of where participants come from. And I want to, in response to the prompts for this, so the idea of how can we think about impact, sustainability, and pedagogical outcomes in global experiences. I'm going to do that through telling you the process of how this works. So how our pedagogy works, and we call it an applied pedagogy approach, is that we embed all of the learning in making and in creating, and then we obviously have seminars and reflection and dialogue, but it's centered around the challenge of, if you have a group of young people from over 30 countries around the world, they come from, we have students that will come from Pakistan and Argentina and Canada and Palestine and Syria and Lithuania and Russia. How can we get them all to engage meaningfully from a level of equity? And we found over a lot of failure that the application of the pedagogy towards an outcome helps facilitate that a little bit. We also take a critical pedagogy approach. We use Standpoint as our notion. We focus on critical consciousness, and we focus on social position. We do it in a global lens. So the difference in background is that when you have students coming to us from places like Beijing and Shanghai, meeting with students that come from Ohio and Arkansas, it's very interesting to see how those differences reconcile. So we have a pedagogy that I'll tell you about how we scope it. This is what last year's group looked like. We had about 75 folks. We have different faculty. You'll see Henry Jenkins was with us. He's hidden on the back right there for our 3 weeks last summer, or for our month last summer. And then we also have young kids. I don't know how they get there, but there are young people. I don't know what to do with them. They kind of run. So I'll explain to you a little bit about how this project works. Meaning, making, impact, and sustainability, which is prompts from the first question that we came up with. We focus the program. So when the students come, they work pretty much all day and night. And we have built a pedagogy formally that starts with seminar and moves to workshop, and then it's very much student self-driven. The students are allocated into groups that are based on diversity of background, and we invite organizational partners working at the social capacity level, and we frame the curriculum and the pedagogy around a problem that they frame for our group. So, for example, we work with the UNDP on women's empowerment rights in the Middle East, focusing in the non-Gulf version of the Middle East 1 year. We worked with the Red Crescent Climate Center on urban resilience 1 year. Last year, we worked with the 19 Million Project on migration. And I can show you what we create. And we've worked again with UNESCO Global Voices and others. So the notion of applied work happens as such that the prompt is provided, and then we have a series of seminars. We have about 20 faculty and practitioners that are in residence with us. They provide a series of inputs, conceptual, theoretical. We have workshops that focus on skill acquisition, that focus on kind of culture bridging, that focus on identity and community, and that we're working simultaneously with the students to provide theoretical foundation, to provide connection, cultural connection, and then we're also focusing that work on a problem that forces them to bring their ideas and values together in this space. So for example, last year, I can just show you quickly, we focused on migration, and the outcome of an applied work project looks something like this. So, and this is all student-driven, and it's all student-led work with the faculty serving as facilitators of sorts. So, the goal with the 19 Million Project was how can we humanize this concept of migration? Something that its representation and narratives in the media oftentimes gets abstracted by its distance from the stories of migrants and refugees themselves. And so the students worked together, again, coming from their 30 backgrounds, to create a publication that was a series of multimedia essays that involved visual storytelling, audio storytelling, textual narratives, and they had to work across groups of diverse students to create these stories. So you see everything. They take on things from voice, structural inequalities, families' emotions, life on hold, and they all try to provide an intimate portrait. Some of the students actually went out and found refugees in Salzburg and brought them into our program and did storytelling around their journeys. So and they worked with the 19 Million Project to create this. So the focus of something like this is to actually think about how pedagogy can produce something meaningful and how process can influence product. And that's what we focus on that, because the product, again, when we bring these folks together, it becomes quite difficult just in having dialogue in the abstract to face this, much like other programs have done. We also focus on impact. So working with our partner for our MOVE publication, we've had content, we've had downloads and readings in over 100 countries around the world of that project. So we do focus on having an outcome. And again, this bridges the learning. When we talk about sustainability and impact, we try to move this beyond just a 1-month experience. Another thing, just for sake of time, that we focus on is creative practice. So in addition to them coming together around one project, we use kind of art and civic art or socially engaged art to think about how they can be prompted to, I won't play those, but so for example, they will be forced to take a topic like race or like movement or equity, and they will be asked to create civic art, socially engaged art outcomes. With this image they've created, here are some of the different, they've created things on tolerance, gender stereotypes, and space to voice. So, and through this process as well, we enable some of this coming together. The last component that I'll speak to in limited time before I get to challenges is this notion of participatory research. So in addition to them being there, we have this faculty that's also quite diverse. And one way that we think about sustainable impact through our learning is we focus on collaborative research, applied research, action research, and that we use our anchor partner institutions and universities to engage in this year-round. And we normally try to fund that. One project we did, and this is action research, was that our participants went back to their homes and had to document what they found as major urban problems in their cities. And so we had urban trash, and this was in Kampala, I believe. We had congestion here in Kenya. We had drugs, flooding in the U.S., and poverty in Mexico City. And through creating these vignettes and these narratives, having public displays of this, we think about the type of learning and narrative that emerge as year-round. Our faculty also engage in this through collaborative publications. We put edited volumes together. Last year we published a report on civic media and migration that brought together our student voices and our faculty voices into creating some research output that might sustain this. So, okay, and the last point about sustainability is we think about how to scale these models. So much like Out of Eden, I imagine we've been growing, but we have a certain capacity that we can reach in terms of engagement with them. So for 5 years, we created a project that's based in Beirut, where we bring young, aspiring journalists and media makers and educators together for 2 weeks to think about human rights expression. And the pedagogy is modeled after what we've done in Salzburg. It's just worked with Middle Eastern Okay. And I will end on this challenge, and I'm just going to leave this here. No more pretty pictures. I will say that the pedagogy that we have created around this, so in thinking about impact, is the importance of having this human connection, the importance of thinking about how identity bridges with community and is applied towards some outcome, allows us to have the types of encounter that you heard from Out of Eden. It allows us to build in these non-formal and informal spaces of learning that happen during the month in Salzburg, but that also happen after they leave. Challenges we have to this term global citizenship, which is not a term that we use, but it's a term that I think we oftentimes are presented because it's a popular term. identity matters, and global citizenship sometimes in the context of our program flies in the face of identity. So this idea about their cultural identity, their personal identity, and the sense of the global identity. We have a very intense evening where we take them, and as part of the curriculum, one way that we scale this, just a quick story of this is, we have a talent show on a Tuesday night, and we they bring some of their cultural traits, backgrounds together. We also, a week later, because where this program is housed was one of the Nazis' local headquarters in World War II. The SS was there, so we have these really strong, powerful visuals of where we eat breakfast and where the SS would organize their mornings during the war. And we have an evening on thinking about conflict and genocide in media, and the students are coming from all different backgrounds with different knowledge sets. And when they're presented with thinking about this, and we present the film, they quite quickly go from this veil of like, I'm a global citizen, I'm getting over my stereotypes, to really kind of coming back in their shell. And so we really find a difficult balance between identity and the sense of global perspective. Obviously is interesting, and then location, we talk about social location, economic location matters, and then lastly, critical consciousness. We necessarily want that to be a part of this pedagogy, but sometimes that can fly in the face of the larger global outcomes that we're looking to get. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you, and then look forward to the dialogue.
So I'm gonna sit in part because I took my shoes off and I can't put them back on. But also because I'm a little bit of an outlier here in so much that I don't have a program to share with you. I'm also don't think often about the concept of global citizenship. I was sort of asked here to think through the lens that I do often think about, which is the lens of critical pedagogy, and sort of apply it to the programs that we've heard here. Paul and I just discovered sitting here getting to know each other that he was going to present, or I discovered sitting here next to Paul, that he was going to present a program that uses critical pedagogy as a frame for doing this work. And so those last 4 things that he shared on that slide were exactly the things that I was going to say. So with that, I think I'm not going to say much. I'm just going to offer 3 questions. So I think as Paul framed, critical pedagogy is a way of thinking about education opportunities that's attentive to the socio-political realities of people and places, and really puts as a goal preparing people to engage with those socio-political realities with the intention of trying to get to a more just sort of ends. And I think in thinking through that lens, sort of 3 big questions came up for me, particularly listening to the Out of Eden Learn presentation. And the first question is sort of what are the implications of global citizen programs that don't place some sort of civic action or goal as a primary outcome? And if students are engaging with those programs, thinking about that as a way in which they understand what citizenship means or global citizenship means, what messages might they be getting without that sort of action implication? I also just wondered a little bit about what the implications are of not engaging with the messy. And so, for example, I was really struck in the Out of Eden Learn narrative when the student initially said sort of barriers protect people. And we got to hear the other student engaging of well, it's actually perhaps more complicated than that. But what happens if, what if that exchange never happened? Because the students didn't have sort of the knowledge to really think more deeply about the complexity of borders. And so with students engaging with topics like that and not having the opportunity to engage a little deeper with the messy, what are the implications of that? And how do we think about our responsibility as people sort of setting up these programs of that? And I guess the last question I was wondering a lot about is sort of how we think about these pedagogies as not neutral all their own. So in particular, again, thinking about some of the things we were hearing that was mentioned as outcomes and possibilities in the Out of Eden Learn program, there were things like listening and looking and curiosity. And those are things that I think are really important, but those are things that I think happen through the lens of who people are, and are not in and of themselves sort of neutral actions. And so how do we engage young people potentially in thinking about how they are listening, how they are looking, and and their sort of curiosity is necessarily interacting with who they are, what their sort of social location is, and all of those pieces. Was another question that came to mind. And then I guess the last thing I'd say related to that, like this sort of notion of curiosity, you can be curious in very bad ways, right? The sort of way that you enact that can be quite harmful. And so then, so how do we sort of complicate and help people think about, or think for ourselves in these categories that we're using in these programs about some of those pieces? Those are my big questions. I said it, sit in my chair.
So I think in the format we'd agreed to, having Leah's questions in particular, that we on Out Lead and Learn would say a few things, and then Paul, you would respond to some questions that Aaliyah had provoked, and then we will invite everybody just to take a few minutes to turn and talk, think about questions that they might have, and open up the dialogue more broadly. It's big questions and important ones. Shall I dive into this?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there were three big things here, and I don't think we have ready answers, but some of these we have thought about at least. I'll start with your third point about the issue of identity and the fact that it is in fact true that looking listens are not neutral acts, and your positionality undoubtedly affect how you see the world. I think it's important that you raise that, because I do think at times we may lose sight of that a bit on Out Lead and Learn, and possibly in the way it's enacted in classrooms it is presented as neutral. But the very way we've set up the platform was actually intended as a tool to help young people to think about their positionality in the world. And in fact, what we find is that when you've got 120 kids, for example, going on a walk in the neighbourhood and looking, the differences in perspective, every time we've run this, there's going to be huge variation, even on kids who've gone down the same street, maybe in their neighbourhood. Maybe we're leaving a bit too much to chance, and I think we do need to go back and look at it. But one of the underlying pedagogic premises is we're trying to leverage the internet and the power of connectivity to try and help young people to see in a bit their own subjectivity and their own positionality in the world. But I think there is food for thought there. There's more we could be doing explicitly in our curriculum activities. And that speaks a bit to this messiness that we may or may not be encountering. Again, when many students talk about borders and boundaries, we inevitably get a range of perspectives, and students, we've heard from them, some browse through everything that students have posted, some will more eclectically kind of go through and see. But our hope is that even if they themselves on their first pass through didn't see anything particularly complex, by looking at other people's posts, that they would. However, it's been an ongoing tension really on our programme, the extent to which we really set things up to ensure that students are forced to go into what you might call messy, uncomfortable territories. And I will say the first Learning Journeys 1 and 2, and our earlier iterations of Out Lead and Learn, you could accuse them of being maybe a bit too nice. Now, I think if you've got 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds, that is 100% appropriate, and in anything we're trying to lay the boundaries so that young people are not afraid to reach out and learn about other people. By the time you're getting to high school or even late middle school, maybe asking more critical questions, we shouldn't be leaving that as much to chance as we are. But as a programme, I guess if we situate ourselves in a panoply of exchange programmes, we have kind of gone for the more student-led, trying to shift overall perceptions and consciousness about the world versus really trying to measure civic action as an outcome. But it's something we wrestle with, and especially as the political landscape has shifted whilst we've been enacting the programme, it kind of doesn't feel enough in a way for kids to think, oh, I've really thought about my culture, and I've had a really great, meaningful encounter with a kid somewhere who I wouldn't have met. Sure, do you want to jump in?
Maybe we'll turn to Paul.
Yeah,
See if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in. So I think it's a little bit, I think these questions change a little bit because we are working from, we use this term agency quite often, and we are looking for that kind of agents of social change outcome. So we are really, we built this model, this kind of voice agency and then power, whatever word you might think. And when we see, before our cohort comes, so we see the value of having this in-person cohort be there for a month as necessary. Before they come, everyone they do quite a lot of reading, and then they have these identity and community narratives that they have to present. And those narratives are put in exchange with each other when they start, and then when they meet. So identity is, they have a bunch of prompts, how they see themselves, and it really stays on this level of like, well, this is who I am, this is where I come from. And then when they meet and they have to kind of figure out their identity and community in contrast to all the others there, it becomes this really interesting way that they think about dialogue and they think about how they started. And I think that necessarily, so this listening, looking, curiosity, it starts from that, at that level of identity, and it only scales up into like an actualized form of pedagogy for us with outcomes when they have to apply that to working together towards something. And that's where we notice the most change, and that's also where we notice the most struggle and messiness of this idea of globalness, which goes into your second question. Borders are very real. Last summer we had 4 participants from Syria who were no longer from Syria, that had been refugees in Lebanon, that we were able to find some support to bring over. And that when we think about the messiness of engagement, their experience versus I bring 3 students from Emerson who have never, have not been near anything like that. And so when we think about borders, boundaries, and engagement, we have this really unique, we designed to have this diversity of inputs so that we think about borders not only physically, but we think about them culturally, we think about them in terms of their experience. And I think our whole project is to try to put that together and not necessarily define the outcomes, but put all of those different traits in dialogue and see where we can come to as a whole.
Let me just add one, I really like to hear from Maria, but I'll just add something super quickly too, because I think it's clear that we care about a lot of the same things, and I think some of our ways that we're trying to get there are different, and they take a different pace and a different perspective. So I just want to share a tiny bit about what we're doing to try to learn about how to make changes toward regionalism. And we have, and this is like for better or worse. We're in academia and we have 3 research streams going with our project. And we're trying to understand the quality of the students' experiences in 3 particular areas so that we can tweak our design to move the students along. In our 3 areas, we're trying to look at slow and how they're, what they're experiencing through slow and where we can move that from sort of superficially observing a world to more deep observations. We're looking at students' concepts of culture and places where they're finding challenges and where they might change, and we're trying to think about what we can learn from that research about how we can create a program, and also Carrie is helping us think about digital exchange, so online exchange, and sort of looking at how students talk to one another online and where we can find lever points in that. So I think we're sometimes very frustrated that we're not moving fast, but that is our sort of modus operandi toward trying to change. I saw you scribbling, so
I feel no need to say anything else right now.
Yeah.
Maybe we could open it up.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So we did think it might be, because especially as there's a fair number of people in the room, and it feels a little warm in here, I might just add. So if you want to just take a few minutes to turn and talk to somebody sitting next to you, anything that strikes you as interesting about what we've said, and then challenges or puzzles or questions that you might have about the type of work we've just discussed. And we'll take everybody a chance to 5 minutes, and then we'll kind of bring it back and kind of call in the ideas that we've been talking about.
I'm here. I'm curious about kind of like the but on the other hand, it is not as many as I think someone says technology. You know, but I'm also maybe there's something how you plan citizenship, part of that is
American right now. This has been my bugaboo for a somebody that's willing to so we're
kids are already very inviting to see it's already out there, so I think there should be things to counter
So I think we'll bring it back in so we can share some of the wealth of the conversations. Does anybody want to start off by sharing a highlight from their conversation or a burning question that you were discussing amongst one another?
Lynn has a great question.
Oh. Cold call by Helen.
I'm not sure it is a great question, but I was really taken by the messiness, the point around messiness, and what it means to sort of work on the ground, and how that messiness can be in the moment and in dialogue. And in my experience, I've done some work with girls online around the country, and it wasn't until we brought them together on their request to have a retreat, to really sort of start to think about, even just to pitch their actions that they would then be working online with, and that they became truly accountable to one another, and they also called one another out on microaggressions and different kinds of things that were happening. So I'm just, so it's not really a question, it's just a comment, I guess, or maybe how you can have that kind of messiness without actually being together at some point, really working together. How you call one another out in a critical way, but also in a way that can be kind of scaffolded for you, so that it's productive. And it sounds like you think about that. I mean, I don't know how you.
Well, we'll say something, then we'll hear some other things. I mean, it is a challenge. We have put together very thoughtful community guidelines, and also our community, it is anonymous. Now, that's for IRB reasons, because we're doing research, but actually it's been a blessing, it turns out, on our community. In fact, just in the last 2 weeks, this has come up as a dominant theme, and I've noticed it becoming more of a theme over the last few years, so I don't know whether this is reflective of concerns out in the broader community. Kids thank us for it being anonymous, and some kids who won't go on social media, this is their opportunity to express themselves. And we haven't got concrete data on this, but anecdotally, it's kids who feel marginalised or who feel ignored within their current context. This gives them a venue to express. And we, Shea, who's our project coordinator, is actually currently in Singapore filming a video which shows a classroom in Singapore, and Beaverton, actually we've deliberately picked that to match up with this. We have a beautiful snippet of audio from a transgender student who said some people might think it being anonymous is kind of a barrier to communication. I call it a safety net. And so it's a very interesting tension, and juxtaposes a bit the Out of Eden Learn experience from Facebook and other things where kids are much more on display as the norm. So to say it's a dilemma, but then we don't know to what extent are they being authentic. I mean, these are all things we can only get at really when we talk to the kids individually through interviewing. But thank you for raising that. And I kind of, you feel a bit envious when you hear about Paul's program and her dad for a month. And Did you want to add something?
I mean, I think, yeah, it is different when you are in person. There is that messiness that's actually core to the program working. But, we were just talking in our group about how that scales. So we have a pretty active online group. We have projects that continue. And I think messiness online is hard. And anonymity may help, but I think it all depends on context and culture and where you are. I think, at the place we are with learners, that anonymity might be, it helps to protect some that are working in places where there's literal physical harm and risk in place. And at other times, but the messiness that you can scale to in person, definitely, we've not found that equated, but not necessarily needed,
Yeah, when you were talking about the challenges, and you mentioned the ethical challenges, the question that you posed is, are we privileging the privileged? I was wondering if there are deliberate strategies to actually include those who are in the periphery, besides the fact that their identities are anonymous. And then the other issue is when you talked about the fact that kids, there's this idea of slowing them down. What if they don't want to be slowed down and they actually need the contrary, to be sped up?
Those are both super great questions. To the first, we are trying to do some things. We are limited in several ways, but frankly, we're also limited by funds. So I'll tell you two of the ways that we're trying. We're in the process of trying to build a low bandwidth mobile version of the program so that it doesn't require high level technology. That's one barrier for some kids. We actually have been experimenting with what we call an analog version of the program that doesn't involve any technology at all. And I've been using it in some places where there's really no chance that the kids will be able to be involved without it. Honestly, it's problematic. We're working on it. The other huge barrier for us is language. So we do have a Spanish version, and we've done some translating into Chinese, but because the translation is a huge issue, and it's something we would love to be able to crack that nut, because I think that would be huge. But these are all really important for us. In terms of the slowing down, that's a great question. I'd love to have a really long conversation with you about that sometime. I'll just say a couple things. One, we've been sort of really surprised at how much kids tell us they love slowing down. But slowing down does not mean being mindful and whatever. I mean, sometimes it means that, but sometimes it means buzzing around the neighborhood and seeing things with fresh eyes. And so in some ways, in fact, we have a teacher who says this on video, you can go fast to go slow. So we are not using slow in a very high bar way, but more in the sort of way of seeing the world with fresh eyes, listening to things that you hadn't heard before. I don't think that fully addresses your question, but it might go a little bit.
I'd just add, I came in, slow wasn't my thing coming into this. I think it taps into something that lots of kids are hungry for, actually, low tech and having an authentic experience in the real world. And some of the tools that we've developed for helping kids slow down are kind of like, whoa, I've never noticed that. So in some ways, the moment now that we're operating this in, I think makes it a particularly timely concept. 20 years ago, maybe not so. And then just to say a challenge with the language, because we have looked into making it so kids could express themselves in their own language. We're actually finding lots of kids want the opportunity to try to learn English in the current, the political, economic reality of today. So that's something we have to navigate, as we think for the future of the program.
So I had a nice example. I had an example for the question that you just posed about slowing down or speeding up. An example. So I'm an early childhood educator, and I in Foxborough Regional School District, and I recently I took a course with middle school and high school teachers, and I shared the Out of Eat and Learn, some of the documentation, and some of the slowing down. And so a few weeks went by, and one of the middle school poetry English teachers came up to me and said, I never thought of taking them outside to write poetry. I don't even know why I never thought of it, but I guess I was afraid I'd lose control. I guess I was afraid they'd go out and they would start running. But she said I decided to try it, and at first I had to make some guidelines and some boundaries and use some of the tools, and she used some of the thinking routine tools. And she shared with me what an incredible, meaningful experience it was for her students to go out and just do something a little different, in a different way, and just be outside and write poetry outside. And she said they produced some amazing pieces. But I think, I don't know if that kind of is an example of something like that, where you just look at it in a new direction. I often say to teachers, they'll say, well, we don't have enough time to go outside. I think, well, who's handcuffing your hands to the desk? I know we have a lot of demands placed on us for Common Core and different expectations. However, it's okay to get out. And I think you have to give yourself permission to slow down, give yourself permission to go out and notice something in a new way. And the children are so appreciative of it. So I thought that might be.
Hi. I have 3 questions, but feel free to take either or all in the interest of time and as you see fit. So something I really appreciated was the sophistication in the conversation about boundaries. I was personally blown away by the 2 kids were talking, and something I wondered was how transferable that knowledge is. And when you talk about boundaries in terms of safety and protection, does that knowledge get transferred to more macro sort of phenomenons or issues that are happening across the world, which is like whether it's the conversation in the US or it's in Syria or wherever. And are children at a particular age even mentally developed to have that sort of knowledge transferability capacity, or does it only come when you grow older? So those are a few things that I was wondering. The other thing was, I also really liked the ethical and psychological dilemmas that you posed. And there was something about like similarity, and when you meet someone different, the first thing that connects you is, oh my god, you watch this TV show, I watch this TV show, and it builds an instant connect. And it made me sort of question, what exactly are we looking to achieve as a global citizen? Like, what are we hoping that this person would be able to say when he is a global citizen or she is a global citizen and sees the world like X? And I was also wondering if it's like stages, depending on the identity that you hold. Very recently, one of the professors here introduced me to racial identity development stages, which is how you sort of like, as a student of color or a white student, when you interact with other races, how you develop your identity and how you see yourself and how you see the other. And I'm wondering for a global citizen if there are like stages where when you first come out, like for me, when I first came to the US, when I came a year ago, this was my first time in the US, first time out of the country, and I came here with the idea of we're all like this melting pot of diversity. And when I came here, like everybody said I was a student of color, and for me I was just like, I don't understand that. Like I thought we were all educators who came here to like talk about quality education for everyone, and now everybody's telling me I'm brown and I'm a student of color, and it was really like disorienting for me. And it took me a while to understand that actually maybe we're not a melting pot, maybe we're a salad bowl, where someone's a tomato, someone's a cucumber, someone's a potato, and everybody's just trying to be themselves in this big salad bowl. But the way I experienced it, and of course it's just my personal experience here, was I felt like we were a oriental platter, where there was a chili sauce and a vinegar and a soy sauce in all different compartments, and there was no interaction. So you needed like a dim sum to really like go in and like get everyone to like intermesh. And I didn't really find that dim sum in my time here. And my last something that I really liked was Paul's like little piece about storytelling, which to me has been a big theme in this year, where I did feel that across all skin color, gender, whatever we are on the outside, something that we really connect with is stories. And people really like come together. And I was interested in what you did with people in the Salzburg Academy, and when you have them all together and you had a storytelling piece. I also looked up on your website, you had a game called Stake, I think, which was a role-playing game, which sort of was of interest to me because I was doing playback theater and looking into psychodrama, which is a lot of like role-playing and social perspective taking, and I was wondering where that piece fit in the work that you do, and yeah, I think that's about it. Those were my questions.
You sure?
Yes.
Do you want to talk? No, you want to pick up on the salad bowl?
Enjoyed that.
All right.
Then I'll go.
Okay, so so thank you for those questions. I can just start, I can just answer quickly the global citizenship idea. We find it problematic, I think, because there is this, I mean, I don't think it's problematic. What does it make to be a global citizen? That's a really interesting question. And I guess I've just been a bit apathetic to the term global citizenship. But I realize, like, when we do this, for us, it's about, imagine like everybody, it's about first learning how to listen. Second, it's about realizing your social position and the resources you have in the world. And this gets to critical consciousness and standpoint formation. We focus really heavily on that because that is, sensitive privilege and entitlement and the relativity of all that. And that's hard to do online, it's hard to do in person. And then I think once you think about how you listen, then you think about how your voice fits and how it applies. And then we sell on this idea of agency. Agency is about how, it's a lot, but we look at how you envision your place and your efficacy in the world. And I think there's really something important about holding on to an identity and a local identity. And as you said, it's about when you do come into encounter with other identities, you understand it as a complex ecosystem, and that if you are, I think you mentioned potato in a salad, that someone's not holding themselves, but the salad eventually gets. I don't know, what is the way to end that? Eating together? That's not a realistic way to look at it, but you want the potato and the carrot to talk. So I think that's hard. So I think when we ever say that, it almost puts like an unnecessary weight on the encounter and the interaction and learning, which we don't want to do. But we want to, at the end, we hope, all the evidence that we have shows that they have shifted their perspective, they've shifted how they understand their community, they've learned a lot about other places, and that's all important. And then the storytelling aspect is, I think, the storytelling, which I didn't mention explicitly, but I think story is almost the way that you get into global citizenship. Like that, it is through story. It's not, you can put what we say is, I can give you 100 cases of how things work elsewhere in the world. The example I brought up is we could have a distance critical dialogue about politics in the Middle East and about the Mexico-US border. And until you put students that come from Tijuana with students that come from LA together and you talk about what that means, through story, through experience, through the way that they understand and they tell that, I think that's where the meaningful encounter comes. So story, I think, is the anchor for what we do. We're trying to build story. I'll stop there. I can talk to you about Aztec after it. So it's an interesting project.
Thank you.
I don't think I have anything really to add to what Paul said. I mean, to your the only maybe thing I would just re-emphasize to your food analogies and the question that was in there is that I think like maybe what you were saying makes me feel even more. I don't know if that's the right word, is like putting a stake in the ground that like this kind of identity work and the social location work that Paul was referring to like sort of has to be a part of this, so that like you were sort of able to describe that you had a particular perspective, like given your background and like some of the experience there, and that we have to like sort of help people be able to do that, to parse out sort of where their sort of thinking and their way of understanding is coming from, so that they can then see how someone else's who's different is also coming from their social location. So that's not an answer. I guess I just say that I feel like that concept then is really, really important in these kinds of dialogues.
I don't want to be pessimistic, but I do think there's something we need to be. It's a difficult question to ask, and it's a difficult question perhaps to end on.